Kiril Sokoloff is a giant in our industry. He's the founder of 13D Global Strategy and Research, the preeminent research shop in the entire business. Kiril's experience goes back 35 or so years, and his network of contacts is truly extraordinary. Kiril's essential reading for many of the boardrooms of S&P 500 companies, the world's most famous hedge funds, family offices, asset management firms. People really listen to Kiril. He always has something important to say. In this series, we're going to turn things around, and Kiril is going to be the interviewer. He's going to delve into his incredible Rolodex of contacts and pull out some of the most interesting people and famous people in the investment world and broader than that, and bring them to Real Vision. He'll be asking the questions that matter so we can truly learn from these other legends in the business. The other great thing about Kiril is he finds for us people that we wouldn't ordinarily know about, people who are incredibly successful in their field that we can learn a lot from. And the first of these is Ronnie Chan. In today's first episode, Kiril will interview his dear friend Ronnie Chan, the chairman of Hang Lung Properties, a hugely successful real estate business based in Hong Kong. Ronnie knows many, many people around the world. He's maybe the world's greatest networker, and that makes him incredibly fascinating to listen to. He's also fulfilled an important role in bridging the differences in Eastern and Western values and culture. He's been investing in China for decades, was one of the first to invest in Chinese technology. So I'm really looking forward to Kiril sitting down with Ronnie and picking his brains and learning from the journey that Ronnie's gone through in his career and some of the understanding he has of the world. Personally, I can't wait for these two great minds to get together. So let's sit back and enjoy.
Ronnie, thank you for joining us. It's great to see you. We've been friends a long time.
Wonderful.
You just flew in from Guatemala this morning. You're off to Europe next week. You've been on the stage with Putin. You've introduced Henry Kissinger at a JP Morgan conference. You travel around the world 15 times a year. You're indefatigable.
A lot more than that, but anyway, it's okay.
So my question is, what makes Ronnie run?
The world is an interesting place.
Yeah.
History is an interesting thing. And life is short. So why not explore? And why not do something meaningful for yourself and for the society?
So you've gotten to know Putin pretty well. And you were going to be questioning him on the stage, and one of his handlers said, you know, ask him tough questions. Who is Putin? What are his objectives? What kind of person is he? Is he foresightful? What is his agenda? What does he want for Russia?
Well, first of all, I don't know him that well. I've only met him a couple of times.
Yeah, well, that's more than the rest of us.
I don't know why. You know, they needed somebody to speak on Asia business with him 2 or 3 years ago in St. Petersburg, and I happened to be around, and so they say, hey, Mr. Chan, would you like to do that? I thought, well, that's fun. The moderator was Charlie Rose, who was at that time associated with the Asia Society and on the board, and so I said, why not? And that's how it began. The interesting thing is, last year in Vladivostok, they asked me to moderate a 2.5-hour session with Putin, together with Moon Jae-in of Korea, the president, President Batoga of Mongolia, and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. That which surprised me so much was that no one told me from Putin's staff what to cover, what to say, what not to say, what I should say, And what they prefer that I do not say. Never, not a word. Either they didn't do their homework, or they did the homework so well that I'm not a crazy guy. It's broadcast live.
Yeah.
If I decide to go crazy, it's pretty messy, could potentially. But anyway, to me, someone like Putin is perhaps inevitable for a country with Russia's history.
Right.
It's a proud people. Its self-view for the last 300 years have been one that is, on the one hand, admiring Western Europe, but on the other hand, being very proud of its own culture, literature, and music, and what have you. And at one point, they were at the height of international relations, right? After the Second World War, whether it's real, whether it's not real, doesn't matter. Perception is they're the only other superpower next to the United States. And so when you go from there to 1990, suddenly a collapse.
Right.
The psychological trauma for the people, for the nation, is something that we cannot underestimate.
Right.
And so the desire to rise again is inevitable. Especially since, in my opinion, the West has missed some opportunity.
Yes.
I was speaking in St. Petersburg 2-3 years ago on a session on Asia, and I make this point of how the West probably missed a great opportunity to gain Russia onto its side. Not that the West 100% made mistake, but overall, I think the West could have done a better job, in my opinion. After my session, I was interviewed by a TV crew, and there was a lady, a middle-aged lady, maybe, I don't know, 40, 50-year-old, waiting at the door. I have no idea who she is. Once I finished, I walked out, and she came to me and said, Mr. Chan, I want to thank you for what you have said about how the West perhaps has missed the huge opportunity. So you can see that the mindset of the people is waiting for a strong man so that as a nation they can rise again, or at least to have more respect in the international community. We all know that now, that before 1990, they were perhaps not half as strong as the West made it, them to be, especially economically. But the image that they have of themselves and the rest of the world have on them is that they are the other superpower. And they went from there to really a pitiful situation. Economically, they were really in terrible shape in the 1990s and indeed into the 2000s. So I suppose the rise of a person such as Putin, it seems to me, is inevitable. You like it, you don't like it, it's going to be that way. Can we work with them? I don't know, but I think we should try. If we don't, then it's a little fatalistic that you have a country that's going to go its own way, and they have a lot of nuclear weapons, and they have some science foundation that no one should underestimate. So, for better or for worse, the West in the last 20, 30 years have perhaps not handling the Russian issue as wise as it could have been. And so Putin become, on my mind, an inevitability. If it is not Putin, it will be somebody else. But it will be along the same line as Putin. And what do they have? They basically, it's a one commodity economy and one industry economy. And the more trouble they make in the Middle East, to them, the higher the energy price, the better off they will be. So they have no reason to want a peaceful Middle East. How can you blame them? Put yourself in their position. Say, be altruistic. Come on. Who is altruistic? Right? Every country is for its own best self-interest. So Russia developed in a way that is altogether inevitable. The question rather is the West wise enough to deal with them in a way that is for the best interest of the West?
Yeah.
Which may involve, most likely will involve, a Russia who is not as pushed to a corner. You push anybody to a corner.
Exactly.
As long as he or she has some ability to fight back, it's no choice to, it's existential.
Right.
And to me, Russia is in that position.
You have a wonderful way of managing your real estate company. You told me years ago that you sell when prices go up, you go into cash, and then you wait for the bust or much lower prices. It's so alien to what most people do and most developers.
Come on, Kiril. That's what everybody is supposed to do, right?
That's what they're supposed to do, but they don't necessarily do it. We all want to do it, but what is the signal for you that it's gotten too high and you want to go to cash and now it's a time to buy?
I think mankind has a weakness, and that is want to be acceptable to the society, to its peers. To some extent, that's good. But if you are doing investment that can really work against you, you should be able to be removed somewhat from what other people think of you. And I was laughed at, just like many other investors who have been perhaps successful have been laughed at. When the market is going up higher and higher, and why don't you jump in? And that's a time to say, I'm going to sit on my hands. And in other words, you need to be divorced, not just from the market in the sense on a temporary basis. You need to be divorced from your own emotion, from your own feelings.
Right.
In which case, time and again, history has shown that those people who can do that will win. And obviously, I'm just learning from many masters in this world.
Right. Well, it's having the cash at the right time that's the key, because the liquidity crisis comes and there are only sellers and no buyers. So it's having that liquidity to buy that's the great opportunity.
It's very satisfying when the time comes. But before that, you're the laughing stock.
Yes.
But it's okay. You got the last laugh, hopefully.
Your father was somewhat austere. You didn't live a flashy life. You have deep moral values. When you look around the world, it seems that we're losing these values that are so essential to personal well-being and satisfaction and the world to function well.
Well, some of us are a little bit fortunate, I suppose. I feel so sad that so many young people today do not have that upbringing. And you, in a sense, cannot blame them. They grew up like that. And the last, perhaps 30, 40 years, as the world accumulated a lot of wealth after Second World War ended 70-some years ago, the amount of money in the system has grown tremendously. Right. The financial service sector, for example, investment bankers, for example, have amassed a lot of wealth. For better or for worse, they are wealthy. Then you have all the technology boom. So a lot of these people went from having very little or having nothing to having a lot in a very short period of time. And some of them do not have the moral upbringing, the moral fiber that is required for them to handle and to own the wealth that they later in life made. They may have a lot of zeros in their bank account, but they are really in poverty in many, many ways. In China, there's a saying nowadays that China has become so poor in the last 30 years that they've got nothing left now except money.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
a good saying.
It's a sad saying.
It is.
But it's in many ways true.
Yeah.
And so how do we ensure that the next generation of wealthy will have the moral fiber to handle the wealth that they make is an issue for society to tackle.
And how do you suggest we make that happen?
Well, first of all, I don't think that preaching will do any good.
Yeah.
Telling people what to do
Right.
never works. For example, I know a lot of business schools now have a class on ethics.
Right.
I said, it's better have it than not have it, I'm sure. But does it really move the needle?
Right.
I have my doubts. At the end, the most important, in my opinion, and from my observation, is the upbringing in the first 10, 12, 15 years
Right.
of a person's life. If he or she is deprived of a moral education, a family education, then the chances are not that good that the next generation wealthy will turn out well.
Right.
There are, as I always say, exceptions, of course. But exception doesn't make the rule.
Right.
And so society has to face this issue of having increasing wealth in the hands of many.
There's this great quote, which is, you never really know somebody until you see them dividing an inheritance.
Well said.
So when the internet began, or became really widespread in the early to mid 1990s, I was tremendously excited because I thought it would be all of human knowledge available to all of humanity. I was very excited about it. And then it changed, and we found that now it's monopoly control, and there's horrific information, and kids are watching pornography at 12. And what I've felt for the last 10 years is that it has lessened the self-control, because you can, if you see it, you can now get it. Before, there were restraints. So the internet has actually opened up the hidden desires that before were curtailed.
I think you could raise a very good point, and that is how you understand human nature. There's no question that there is good in every man. But let's also not forget there's bad
Right.
in every man.
Right.
And if human history were any guide, then my reading of human history is that perhaps the bad is gaining ground on the good.
Yes. Yes.
There's no world war until the 20th century.
Right.
And now with the internet, with technology, as you mentioned, I think that it is getting to a point where the technology is bringing out all the worst of man.
That's right.
And that, to me, is the danger.
It is.
Technology, of course, is wonderful in many, many ways, as we all know. Otherwise, you and I would be considered as old men. You and I still consider ourselves at 60-some, whatever, as rather young, thanks to technology. But we also should know that technology can also bring out the worst in man. And I think that one of the biggest problems in the world today is the thought that freedom should be unlimited.
Right.
That is to not recognize the bad in man.
Right.
It is to say that we are all saints, we're all good, so we need more freedom. I hope Al Gore doesn't mind my saying this. I asked him one time, I said, Al, do we have perhaps too much freedom? He said, oh no, we need more freedom.
Right.
Now, his statement represents 99.999% of the elites in society. It's nothing new. He's not the only one that say that. To me, that is at the root of a lot of problems.
Right.
How to draw the line, where to draw the line, of course, is extraordinarily difficult.
Exactly.
And every society has to come to terms with itself.
Right.
And how do you decide who's to decide? That's very difficult.
Right.
It's a lot easier to say, just have more freedom. But more freedom will no doubt destroy mankind.
Well, this is
absolutely the will.
This is Plato's circle.
Yeah.
That people will be so tired of the chaos that they will seek the strong man. And you're already seeing that in many parts of the world. So the more chaotic things become, the more we're heading towards authoritarianism.
Exactly. The old philosophers they are wise.
They are. They're very wise.
There's a lot of smart guys today, but there's not a whole lot of wisdom today.
Well, I think the quote is from the Federalist Papers is, if men were angels, they would not need government.
But we are not angels.
That's exactly it. We're not angels. So I don't know if you've had a chance to read the new Da Vinci book by Walter Isaacson. It's just
Walter Isaacson, yeah.
It's a magnificent book.
Uh-huh.
And what I like about it is that Da Vinci was the most curious man in history. If you had lived in those days, you would have been Da Vinci or a Da Vinci.
Oh, come on.
And he was so curious that he wanted to see what the tongue of a woodpecker looked like.
Wow.
And he kept his notebooks that were today are studied by millions of people all over the world because it's so incredible, his inquiry. He wanted to understand how the world worked. But he saw himself not as an artist, but also as an engineer. And so our tech people aren't interested in beauty, aren't interested in how the world works. It's just the latest app to solve this problem. Let's not think about the consequences, let's just put it out there. But if they could stop and say, let's look at how the world works, incorporate Da Vinci's philosophy into how they ran their businesses, it would make a big improvement. Not that that's going to happen, but it would be nice.
Well, I fear that it's not just the tech people that are like that. The whole society is like that.
That's right.
And greed is an inalienable part of human nature.
Right.
And pride is another one of them.
Right.
And these couple of things put together in anybody,
Right.
especially in the smart people in the day of high technology, can really damage a lot. And so there's no one who is, as you alluded to, put everything in the holistic picture, where we have not just wealth pursuit, which is good to some extent, and technology advancement is good to some extent, but there is, at the end, there is humanity. And if anyone were to not recognize human nature, that is the downfall of the human race. And to me, a statement such as, we need more freedom, beyond a certain point, that is to not recognize human nature, that there is also bad in man.
Right.
And so you go against human nature, I don't think that we're going to have a good result. We think that with technology, it's not just the end of history from a political perspective, but even from a civilization development perspective, which is, on my mind, so faulty a perspective to have.
Yes.
And I do worry that humanity will, at the end of the day, crumble under its own smartness.
Yes.
Not because it is too stupid, but because it is too smart. Stupidity is no good.
Right.
But if smartness is not wisdom, then that will also bring the downfall of mankind.
And then we also have what I call a Darwinian economy, where people are seen as liabilities, not assets, working for companies. And they're commodities. And this is why Trump came to power, because so many Americans had been left behind. And that has to change. There has to be an understanding of everybody has to come along. You can't just have a prosperous few.
Correct.
Now, one of the things that's very interesting in the States, I don't know if you've been following it, but I'm very interested in it, is that there are 300 women now running for Congress this year and 50 running for the Senate. We've had 6 special elections since January. Women have won 4. In Texas, there was a primary, and half the women won.
Wow.
Right now, 20% of the Congress is women. So let's just say that the women win win big, which I think they will. I think it's bigger than Trump, bigger than Brexit, bigger than the Tea Party. It may be one of the biggest movements we've ever seen politically in the United States. And men are coming up to these candidates that are saying, I'm glad you're running. And the women are going to vote for them. So we have to think about, what does it mean when women have a big role to play in government? So we're thinking about it. We obviously haven't had the time or the occasion to interview all of these women, but they're interested in healthcare, fixing healthcare, the education, making schools safe, gender parity. And I'm sure it will be a kinder, gentler world with women having a big impact. Do you agree with that?
You know, Kiril, my wife and I, not long ago, arrived at the airport, I suppose I can mention the country, of Tokyo. And we're taking a taxi to our hotel in town. And as I was considering, you know, my wife and I love Japan, love the country. And as I was considering, I thought, you know, I know a lot of bad Japanese people. Just like in every other country, you have a lot of bad people.
Right.
But every bad person I know was a man. I don't know of too many bad Japanese women.
Right.
Maybe it's because I don't know enough of them. Probably true. But I do know quite a few. I've been going there since 1961 as a young man. And so I thought to myself, and I said to my wife, I said, you know, if a country is run all by women, maybe it will be a better place. I don't know.
That's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. So you've been involved with the Asia Society for 20 years, as recently as vice chair and co-chair. And right now, the Asia Society is more important than ever because of the rising tension between America and China. And I understand the Trump administration sees China as not a strategic partner, but as a strategic adversary. So this is a big shift. There's a bridge that you have provided, and Asia Society has provided, trying to understand these two cultures. And as Samuel Huntington said, there's nothing that has caused more bitter, longer, more violent wars than the war of civilizations and cultures. So you went to the University of Southern California for your MBA. You know America extremely well. You know China extremely well. When you look at the differences and you look at the similarities, what's the common interest? And how do we bridge the differences? How do we make it work as we go forward, particularly in this tense environment?
Well, first of all, at the root of everything is the common humanity. If we don't see that and we don't respect that, I don't think that any overlay of culture, civilization, economy, politics, international relations, technology, none of that will work. But that is not to say that we do not recognize and indeed respect differences. There are differences. You are tall and handsome, I'm short and ugly. There are differences. Some of us are born that way, and I have learned long ago to accept that. And respect that there are differences. My hope, until recently, was that with technology, the world has shrunk. We have more interaction with each other and more opportunity to know each other, learn from each other. With organizations such as Asia Society, for which I have devoted almost 30 years of my life, we'll be able to make some small difference. And I was hoping that America, being relatively enlightened, a country, and the fact that it's a younger country may help, that it will be able to be a little bit more enlightened and not muck up the world as previous superpowers have done. Unfortunately, increasingly in the last 20 years or so, my wish has been dashed I tell people that I'm pessimistic, but I'm not passive.
Yeah.
I do my part to hopefully improve situations, and that's why I'm still involved in the Asia Society, although I'm no longer the global co-chair. I'm emeritus now. If one were to give up hope, then
Right.
what is there left?
Yes.
But that said, I cannot deny, however, that from my perspective, America has been moving in the wrong direction.
Right.
So America perhaps is, at the end, as vulnerable to follies
Right.
as previous superpowers.
Right.
I remember 4 years ago, roughly, I was interviewed by Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister of Australia, at the Hay Adams Hotel outside of the White House in Washington, D.C. And I made a statement. I said, from my perspective, China was very, very happy to play second fiddle
Right.
to the United States.
Yeah.
Only the ignorant don't understand that. And if I'm correct, then why make China into an enemy?
Right. Right.
I asked the question, how many enemies do you want? One? Perhaps Russia? You have one.
Right.
You want two? Russia and China?
Right.
You have two. The sad thing is, if a country such as China, in my opinion, is very happy to play second fiddle to the superpower, the hegemon, the United States, any rightful mind will say, let's bring them in as my equal.
Right. Right.
International protocol dictates
Right.
to consider it that way. But
Yes.
the reality is, it's no such thing as equal.
Right.
I'm 5'3". I know I'm never equal. Ever since I was a kid. And so China is very happy to play second fiddle. And after my talk, that was an Asia Society event. Our president, Joseph Shirin, knew at the organization at the time, invited the ambassador from China, who was sitting on the front row, Ambassador Cui Tiankai. And she said, Mr. Ambassador, would you like to make some comment before we close the evening? So he stood up and said, well, some of the things that Mr. Chan said, I think, it's definitely worth considering, which we understand what he meant. As a diplomat, you have to say things certain ways. So then he went on to say, China has long ago decided that we don't want to be number one because it's too expensive, very expensive. I thought to myself, yeah, you're right, Mr. Ambassador, but there's another reason. I just don't believe that China can be number one, or indeed wants to be number one. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to argue with that. And then he went on to say, the best position to be in is to be number 3 or number 4.
Right.
But we woke up one day and found ourselves number 2. You turn to the right, the number 1 slapped you. You turn to the left, the number 1 slapped you.
Right.
And he sat down. That is indeed the case. And if you slap the number 2 enough times, you will make yourself an enemy.
Right.
And how foolish it is. I know a little bit about all the behind the scenes,
Right.
Issues, the weaponry development, a lot of things. For that precise reason, do you want the number 2 to be on your side or to be on somebody else's side?
Right.
Do you want to welcome him in as a friend? Would you have more say in influencing him?
Right.
Or would you have more say when you turn him away? I was told that the Chinese, when they want to develop the space program, they went to NASA and said, can we work together?
Right.
And NASA said, no way. Go away. So today, China has no choice but to develop its own space program. And so does America, does NASA have any say about it? I was told also that some Americans figure out that China now have some of the fastest computers in the world.
Right.
And the chip inside is by America,
Right.
American companies.
Right.
So so the story goes, America went to the company and said, you can no longer sell to the Chinese. So what happened? So the Chinese said, oh, what do we do? No choice but to develop their own chip. And today, something like 4 out of the 10 fastest computers in the world are still Chinese. So is that very smart? I'm a simple guy.
Yes.
I look at the situation and I said, that doesn't sound to be too smart to me.
No.
And there are many other examples of that sort. I remember years ago, I met a guy who was head of the gravitational train project in China. And he told me, he said, you know, we don't have all the technology necessary. Siemens won't sell it to us. I don't know why Siemens doesn't want to sell it to him. Maybe, I don't know if America has anything to do with it. I don't know. And so they have to figure out how to do it. A couple of years later, I bumped into the same guy again. I've only met him twice. And the guy said, so I remember him. I said, do you have the technology now? He said, yeah, we got it. So if Siemens were to sell it to them, of course, I know Siemens is afraid that they would steal the technology and so forth. And by the way, everybody steals technology. America in the old days, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Korea, we all do. Even the Brits. So, but then at least you have a lot more say over. You may have contracts, to sell parts or what have you for a much longer time. And you're trying to stop a train that cannot be stopped. You have 1.375 billion people who want to better their livelihood. And how do you stop that? And morally, one cannot stop it for other people to want to seek a better life. Of course, you can accuse them for doing it, you know, in not the most ethical ways. Who did it in the most ethical ways? Where did America's textile machinery came from? Stole it from somewhere at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. So everybody does that. You borrow, you buy, and you steal. Right? Everybody did that. America, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, everybody. And so it's China's turn. It's not to say that we justify it, but you have to put it in the bigger context of history. So how do you propose to work with the Chinese given the stage of development that they are in? Surely there are better ways to handle it than the way that it was handled in the last 2 or 3 decades, or 2 or 3 decades. So it saddens me.
So it looks like there's more of a confrontation coming than we've had in recent years. And what do you think is the core of the issue? Is it trade imbalance? Is it fear of China leaping ahead in technology, military superiority potentially? What is driving this new tendency towards seeing China as a competitive force rather than a global partner?
Not for a moment do I think that trade is the root cause. To me, that is really just one of the many, many issues. Human nature dictates that if you have been number one for a long, long, long time, very few people would willingly accept having a equal or near equal. It takes an extraordinarily self-enlightened and self-confident man to accept that. Same thing with a nation. And given domestic politics everywhere, in particular, the Western form of democracy has its own dynamics, its political dynamics that moves the country in a particular way, that makes reasonable, sensible decisions almost impossible. There is a systemic political problem that will not make it easy for America as the number one to be enlightened, self-enlightened, to accept a number two and learn to live with it in so doing, you will probably extend your leadership position for a lot longer. Fear of the rise of another country is, I believe, at the root of the problem. And then the domestic political situation also makes it almost impossible for them to make the right decisions. So it's a combination of factors. But then America thinks that our political system is the end of history. We're the best. Well, your system is the best for you, perhaps. Even for you, maybe you need some improvement. But does it mean that your system is the best for everybody? I heard a speech by a US senator, the son of the founder of Asia Society. The founder of Asia Society is John D. Rockefeller III. His son, Senator J. Rockefeller, who just retired, gave a talk which impressed me greatly. He said, at the end of the day, human beings are tribal. He got a point. And if you're tribal, you look at mankind's world events in that light, you understand a lot of why America behaves the way it does. In a sense, it's tribal.
So let's move over to the Middle East. We've got a very interesting dynamic. We have the rise of MBS, the Crown Prince, very ambitious, and his ally MBZ, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, very ambitious. We have Turkey, we have Erdogan, Israel, Iran. Oil prices are going up. Probably it's likely that sanctions will be increased on Iran by America, which means that their oil production will go down. The Saudis have said they are targeting 80, but I mean, why not target the 100? I mean, why that number? You travel to Israel a lot.
80 what?
$80 a barrel.
Oh, $80 a barrel, yeah.
They're targeting, they said they're targeting 80, but there's also, they might be targeting 100. I mean, but if you look at their ambitions, MBS's ambitions, brought all the wealthy businessmen in and negotiated money being taken from them, bought the Da Vinci, bought the 550 million yacht on impulse, and bought the most expensive house in the world. So he's certainly not an unambitious human being. So when do you have enough? And they want the Saudi Aramco to go public, and at $100, it's worth $100 billion more. So it would be likely that they target that. But in any event, there's this whole dynamic and shift there with America's future in the region less sure than it was. Putin putting down his boots in Syria. You travel to the region a lot. You know Israel very well. What's your overview of where things are going there?
You know, Kiril, one reason why I don't think U.S.-China relationship will go bad is because I believe that in the Middle East it's going to blow a lot before U.S. and China got into serious trouble with each other, which is a bad reason.
Right.
I may be wrong, but to me that is really the intransigent part of the world that I just don't see a solution. What I worry is that you have gradually two camps being formed. On the one hand, you have Russia, Iran, and Turkey.
Yeah.
On the other hand, hopefully, you have Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Israel, and the United States.
Right.
That is no comfort to any people.
Right.
When you have two big groupings at odds with each other. But I just don't see any way out of it. And events of the world has a way to take on a life of its own. that if you miss an opportunity somewhere, or if you miss a series of opportunities somewhere, then events just get away from us.
Right, right.
And I worry that we have gone beyond the
Right.
point of no return.
Right.
If so, then the best we can hope for is for Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the United States, and Israel to work together. I think increasingly it's possible. I know that there's a lot of history between Saudi Arabia and Israel and all that stuff, but at the end, necessity of the day will trump a lot of things.
Right.
And as we all know, Saudi Arabia and Israel were not without contact from all these years.
Right.
I suspect that it has increased a lot. And as
Yeah.
some of my Israeli friends told me, Israeli-Egyptian relationship have never been so good for a long, 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 long time. And perhaps it's out of necessity as well. I think that Obama certainly made huge mistakes
Yeah.
in that part of the world.
Right.
And that's the amazing thing about America. You know, U.S. senators, governors who have very little understanding of the world
Yeah.
suddenly found themselves in the White House.
Right.
And how do you expect the person to have any history and knowledge
Right.
deep enough to handle these things?
Yes.
They don't even know who to pick
Right.
as their trusted advisors. If you are like Ronald Reagan, who picked great people,
Yes.
then it's fine. But I don't think that some of these senators and congressmen know how to pick.
Right. Right.
And so, as a result, things just get worse and worse. Obama's mistake basically welcomed Russia back to that part of the world and give them a lot of say. I know that historically, Russia, Iran, Turkey are not necessarily friends. Neither is Israel and Saudi Arabia historically friends.
No.
If they can come together, one of those other three in the north. So that to me is a very, very uncomfortable decision. Take Turkey, for example.
Right.
Turkey tried to be part of the West.
Right.
To my knowledge, Britain was very much
Right.
for it,
Right.
for good reasons. Perhaps again demonstrating how the Brits think far
Right.
and long
That's right.
and rationally
Yeah.
and relatively free of emotion. But the French would not have it. Other EU countries would not have it. So now you are pushing Turkey out. Then they have to find their position in the region
Right.
and in the world. And so you're pushing them right into the bosom of perhaps historic, I won't say enemy, but not friends.
Yes.
And so events of the last couple of years, forget about events of the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, just in the last 2-3 years has moved so fast in that part of the world that worries me greatly.
Yeah. So we have President Xi's One Belt vision, which, from where I sit, is one of the greatest geopolitical visions I've ever seen. I'm interested in your opinion. In any event, how do you see it playing out? What's your view on it?
I suspect that people may be reading too much into it.
Okay.
I think there's a short-term reason for having the Belt and Road Initiative,
Yeah.
and there's a longer-term reason for it. The shorter-term reason, and both are valid, the short-term and the long-term. The short-term is perhaps China has overcapacity,
Right.
over-inventory,
Right.
a lot of things to sell, need to
Yeah.
get rid of them.
Right.
Hey, why not? Moreover, that's exactly what a lot of those countries need. You know, I was in Kazakhstan in the last couple of years. I was in Armenia. I was in Kyrgyzstan. I was in many other countries, Georgia, and whatever, what have you. And They need infrastructure. And what China has is what they need.
Right.
So in that sense, it's a win-win situation.
Yeah.
And again, back to my thesis of common humanity. Why not? If the local people want a better life,
Right.
why not help them? And as we all know from developmental economics, infrastructure is a key at the beginning stage.
Yes.
So China has too much, they need it, sell it to them at cost, below cost, whatever it is, and help them. And China has also a short-term political reason. China needs friends. America, for example, every year go to the United Nations in Geneva and accuse China of human rights. I wonder why don't they pick on Saudi Arabia, for example? We understand why, but anyway. You know, it's a lot of hypocrisy everywhere.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Right.
No one is free from that.
Right.
But America make people think that they are the incarnation of righteousness. That's the problem. They are as vulnerable to human nature and the bad part of it as anybody else. So politically, China needs friends, have more votes,
Right.
just to make sure that America doesn't, you know, give them too much hell,
Right.
in
Right.
human rights and whatever. But there's a longer term issue.
Yeah.
To me, it's a very pragmatic one.
Right.
China needs energy.
Right.
Energy security is perhaps number one,
Right.
high on the agenda of the leaders of China in terms of international relations. You know, a lot of my Israeli friends ask me, why does China vote along with Iran? I said, come on, put yourself in Beijing's position. Iran is the number 3 or whatever
Right.
supplier of natural gas, number 5 in oil or something like that,
Right.
number 7 or whatever. And it's very close. You go from there into Pakistan, for example, and you can go straight up to China. And so, what choice do they have? So, energy security, I think, is one key reason. In general, minerals, natural resources, all the way west of China, all the way to Ukraine, and slightly beyond, have a lot of natural resources. Azerbaijan, for example. Ukraine is still a breadbasket,
Right.
and China has food security issue as well.
Right. Right.
So, from China's longer-term perspective, it makes a lot of sense
Right. Right.
for them to have the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah.
I think the execution of it is extremely difficult.
Mm.
Think about it this way. In the northern route, northern land link, it's all former Soviet Union countries,
Yeah.
CIS. They're all Russian speaking. You need Russia. Without Russia, you can't do it. In the south, you have India. And America makes sure that India doesn't become friends with China. America is very happy to stir trouble for China
Yeah.
through India. As you see what is happening now, India, Japan, Australia, America. Whether the Russian-speaking world in the northern route or the India, you happen to pass through India in the southern route, land link, it's not easy. And then you have this one belt, and then the one road being the sea road.
Yeah.
In the Chinese language, and I do speak Chinese, call it the sea road is very reasonable. But in English, it perhaps better call sea route.
Right.
Roads are on land, roads are not in the sea.
Right.
But what the Chinese, they use the same word, road. So belt and road, the belt is a terrestrial, and the road is the sea link. We really have to segregate the two. The two are quite different. The belt, the terrestrial belt, basically poor countries, needing investment, needing infrastructure,
Right.
huge land mass, not many people.
No.
On the other hand, the sea road or sea route is a lot of smaller countries, more prosperous in general, have been economically developing better on average than the terrestrial belt. And so the needs of these two parts, the belt and the road, the terrestrial belt and the sea route, are very different. After all, human civilization always developed along waters, where be it river or sea or lake. And so it's highly populated along the coast. Those are potential markets for China. The terrestrial belt countries probably don't have, as of now, a lot of money to buy a lot of things from China. Perhaps with the exception of infrastructural necessities, cement, steel, what have you. But the sea route are full of countries that are highly populated with some wealth in many cases, in which case they become potential markets to China. So maybe that is a little bit easier, but then of course you always have other issues. You know, America has controlled all the choke points in the world, all the naval choke points, Malacca Strait, you know, Gulf of Hormuz, and so forth. And so there are challenges, no question. So the Belt and Road Initiative, some people, perhaps yourself included, I don't know, Kiril, may consider that as a brilliant strategic move of China. Maybe it is. Although I'm perhaps a little bit more pragmatic after all, I'm just a simple business guy who's trying to make a buck. So the terrestrial land and the sea route both have its own challenges. But hey, what do? Do nothing? You cannot. China has developed so quickly in the last 4 decades that going international become inevitable. And so the belt or the road or the sea route become inevitable for China. It's just so happened that Xi Jinping enunciated it, he voiced it. Even if he didn't say it, the reality is these things will have to go on anyway, whether it's for short-term economic or short-term political reasons, or for longer-term economic and longer-term political reasons.
So we have technology, and you've been going to Israel for a long time. You've invested there, invested in China and technology. If you were going to invest, or if you are investing now in technology, where would it be?
Basically 2 places. United States and China. I think the United States technology overall is unmatched. Amazing. For example, my family invests a lot in pharmaceuticals, early stage. I think the basic science in America is by far the best anywhere in the world. And the conversion of basic science to commercialization, that process is perhaps better developed than anybody else as well. So I think that America is definitely a place to invest. China, in a limited field, a lot of application of technology, such as through the internet. Israel has a lot of interesting stuff, as we all know, technology-wise, but it's a very small country. A lot of people are now getting attention. They are catching the attention of a lot of people. I suppose I have a little to do with introducing them to mainland China. And so there's a lot of money flowing into the system. It's just a small economy. So you have to be pretty smart to make the right transaction. I don't invest that much in Israel.
Ronnie, thank you so much. It was always fascinating to talk with you, even if it's 11 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock in the morning, as we sometimes done. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, Kiril has an amazing relationship and a trusted friendship with so many amazing people. The global investment titans, corporate board members, and you can see that from his interview with Ronnie Chan. Personally, I'm looking forward to this journey as Kiril Sokoloff brings his Rolodex of incredible, trusted, insightful contacts to Real Vision. I think it's going to be something unique and really special. And I'm so pleased that 13D Global Strategy and Research decided to do this whole series with us to allow you a peek behind the curtains of some of the most famous and interesting people in the investment world.